There are two ways to be fooled. One is to believe what isn't true, the other is to refuse to believe what is true. Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards. I found I had less and less to say, until finally, I became silent, and began to listen. I discovered in the silence, the voice of God. It is better to try something and fail than to try nothing and succeed. The result may be the same, but you won't be. We always grow more through defeats than victories. Geniuses are like thunderstorms, they go against the wind, terrify people, clear the air. People demand freedom of speech as a compensation for the freedom of thought which they seldom use. Life is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be experienced. People settle for a level of despair they can tolerate and call it happiness. Take a chance and you may lose. Take not a chance and you have lost already. The Bible is very easy to understand. But we Christians are a bunch of scheming swindlers. We pretend to be unable to understand it because we know very well that the minute we understand, we are obliged to act accordingly. If I could prescribe only one remedy for all the ills of the modern world, I would prescribe silence. The unhappy person is never present to themselves because they always live in the past or the future. Who am I? How did I come into the world? Why was I not consulted? The question is not to be or not to be, it is what we should be until we are not. The minority is always stronger than the majority, because the minority is generally formed by those who really have an opinion. The function of prayer is not to influence God, but rather to change the nature of the one who prays. The more people who believe something, the more apt it is to be wrong. The person who's right often has to stand alone. Face the facts of being what you are, for that is what changes what you are. God creates everything out of nothing. And everything which God is to use, He first reduces to nothing. The self-assured believer is a greater sinner in the eyes of God than the troubled disbeliever. It is the duty of the human understanding to understand that there are things which it cannot understand. The truth is a trap, you cannot get it without it getting you, you cannot get the truth by capturing it, only by its capturing you. The highest and most beautiful things in life are not to be heard about, nor read about, nor seen but, if one will, are to be lived. In order to help another effectively, I must understand what he understands. If I do not know that, my greater understanding will be of no help to him. Instruction begins when you put yourself in his place so that you may understand what he understands and in the way he understands it. I'm so misunderstood that people misunderstand me even when I tell them I'm misunderstood. The greatest danger to Christianity is, I contend, not heresies, not heterodoxies, not atheists, not profane secularism, no, but the kind of orthodoxy which is cordial drivel. Mediocrity served up sweet. There is nothing that so insidiously displaces the majestic as cordiality. It is not the path which is the difficulty, rather, it is the difficulty which is the path. A man prayed, and at first he thought that prayer was talking. But he became more and more quiet until in the end he realized prayer is listening. Are you not aware that there comes a midnight hour when everyone must unmask? The best news the world has ever heard came from a graveyard. Christ is risen. A man may perform astonishing feats and comprehend a vast amount of knowledge, and yet have no understanding of himself. But suffering directs a man to look within. If it succeeds, then there, within him, is the beginning of his learning. Most people are subjective toward themselves and objective toward all others, frightfully objective sometimes, but the task is precisely to be objective toward oneself and subjective toward all others. A fire broke out backstage in a theater. The clown came out to warn the public. They thought it was a joke and applauded. He repeated it, the acclaim was even greater. I think that's just how the world will come to an end, to the general applause of wits who believe it's a joke. In a theater it happened that a fire started off stage. The clown came out to tell the audience. They thought it was a joke and applauded. He told them again, and they became still more hilarious. This is the way, I suppose, that the world will be destroyed amid the universal hilarity of wits and wags who think it is all a joke. For without risk there is no faith, and the greater the risk, the greater the faith. The most painful state of being is remembering the future, particularly the one you'll never have. Where am I? Who am I? How did I come to be here? What is this thing called the world? How did I come into the world? Why was I not consulted? And if I am compelled to take part in it, where's the director? I want to see him. The daily press is the evil principle of the modern world, and time will only serve to disclose this fact with greater and greater clearness. The capacity of the newspaper for degeneration is sophistically without limit, since it can always sink lower and lower in its choice of readers. At last it will stir up all those dregs of humanity which no state or government can control, and this is one of the most crucial definitions for the whole of Christianity, that the opposite of sin is not virtue but faith. If I were a physician, And if I were allowed to prescribe just one remedy for all the ills of the modern world, I would prescribe silence. For even if the word of God were proclaimed in the modern world, how could one hear it with so much noise? Therefore, create silence. To be a woman is something so strange, so confusing and so complicated that only a woman could put up with it. There is nothing with which every man is so afraid as getting to know how enormously much he is capable of doing and becoming. Listen to the cry of the woman in labor at the hour of giving birth, look at the dying man's struggle at his last extremity, and then tell me whether something that begins and ends thus could be intended for enjoyment. Love is the expression of the one who loves, not of the one who is loved. Those who think they can love only the people they prefer do not love at all. Love discovers truths about individuals that others cannot see. What is a poet? An unhappy person who conceals profound anguish in his heart but whose lips are so formed that as sighs and cries pass over them they sound like beautiful music. Which is more difficult, to awaken one who sleeps or to awaken one who, awake, dreams that he is awake? Truth is not something you can appropriate easily and quickly. You certainly cannot sleep or dream yourself to the truth. No, you must be tried, do battle, and suffer if you are to acquire the truth for yourself. It is a sheer illusion to think that in relation to the truth there is an abridgment, a shortcut that dispenses with the necessity for struggling for it. All the shrewdness of man seeks one thing, to be able to live without responsibility. A road well begun is the battle half won. The important thing is to make a beginning and get underway. Most men pursue pleasure with such breathless haste that they hurry past it. God creates out of nothing. Wonderful, you say. Yes, to be sure, but he does what is still more wonderful, he makes saints out of sinners. The commandment is that you shall love, but when you understand life and yourself, then it is as if you should not need to be commanded, because to love human beings is still the only thing worth living for. Without this life you really do not live. Teach me, O God, not to torture myself, not to make a martyr out of myself through stifling reflection, but rather teach me to breathe deeply in faith. Christ has not only spoken to us by his life but has also spoken for us by his death. People have an idea that the preacher is an actor on a stage and they are the critics, blaming or praising him. What they don't know is that they are the actors on the stage. He, the preacher, is merely the prompter standing in the wings, reminding them of their lost lines. The truth must essentially be regarded as in conflict with this world. The world has never been so good, and will never become so good that the majority will desire the truth. The person who surrenders absolutely to God, with no reservations, is absolutely safe. From this safe hiding place he can see the devil, but the devil cannot see him. This is what is sad when one contemplates human life, that so many live out their lives in quiet lostness. They live, as it were, away from themselves and vanish like shadows. Their immortal souls are blown away, and they are not disquieted by the question of its immortality, because they are already disintegrated before they die. To cheat oneself out of love is the most terrible deception. It is an eternal loss for which there is no reparation, either in time or in eternity. If anyone on the verge of action should judge himself according to the outcome, he would never begin. For love is exultant when it unites equals, but it is triumphant when it makes that which was unequal equal in love. As my prayer became more attentive and inward, I had less and less to say. I finally became completely silent. This is how it is. To pray does not mean to listen to oneself speaking. Prayer involves becoming silent, and being silent, and waiting until God is heard. Truth has always had many loud proclaimers, but the question is whether a person will in the deepest sense acknowledge the truth, allow it to permeate his whole being, accept all its consequences, and not have an emergency hiding place for himself and a Judas kiss for the consequence. The truth is lived before it is understood. It must be fought for, tested, and appropriated. Truth is the way. Anyone will easily understand it if he just gives himself to it. The most terrible fight is not when there is one opinion against another. The most terrible is when two men say the same thing, and fight about the interpretation, and this interpretation involves a difference of quality. Idleness, we are accustomed to say, is the root of all evil. To prevent this evil, work is recommended. Idleness as such is by no means a root of evil, on the contrary, it is truly a divine life, if one is not bored. People understand me so poorly that they don't even understand my complaint about them not understanding me. With respect to physical existence, one needs little, and to the degree that one needs less, the more perfect one is. Since my earliest childhood a barb of sorrow has lodged in my heart. As long as it stays I am ironic, if it is pulled out I shall die.